Tell us about your relationship with the Ascended Master Saint Germain.
Well, the main thing I can say about him, I was just absolutely flabbergasted when he manifested in my living room. This has been about close to 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago. I had been studying the Ascended Master teachings for many years, and I had been taking the ministerial training from an Ascended Master group, and so I knew about the Master Saint Germain and many of the other masters, but I never in my wildest imagination ever expected him to manifest. But as I was ordained, the minister who ordained me, his name was Brother Lou, said, well, now that you're a minister, you got to teach classes. And I thought, classes? I hadn't really thought of being a teacher, and I don't know what to teach or where to teach. And so I started meditating and fasting and asking for answers, and on about the 6th day of my fast, suddenly just Saint Germain just manifested right there in my living room. It started out with scintillating light and then coalesced into a form, and he said, I am come to talk to you, and he gave me instructions. He asked me if I would be under a 7-year indenture with him, that he would be with me for 7 years, tell me what to teach, direct me, and help me, and but I had to follow 13 very strict guidelines, and that's what got it all started. And it lasted, he stayed with me actually 8 years because I didn't get everything done, and then he's been with me all these 30 years. And with so many wonderful things that he did through the years, mostly he had me do work. It wasn't like he gave me long, flowery channelings. He said, do this and do that and cleanse this and write this and that sort of thing. He channeled songs and all different things like that. But at one point he told me to start writing down the things that he had told me so that other people would know. And many of the things were like, what makes a class a good class, what not to do in a class, and what to do with the group, and how to cleanse the planet, and just hundreds and varieties of all kinds of things. So I started following his guidance and compiling a trilogy. He wanted a trilogy of books. And the first book that I wrote about him was Saint Germain's Mystical Quest for the Golden Age. And in this book, he wanted me basically just to outline what, like in autobiographical form, of what took place between us. And so this covered many, many years, and it's kind of an instruction book, but it also talks a lot about the Golden Age, what it's all about, what we need to get into it, and that sort of thing. The second book he wanted me to write was Saint Germain's Mystical Quest for Freedom and Democracy. And he had been the founder of Freemasonry way back in Atlantean times. And he had fostered democracy all through the years, centuries, millennia. He reincarnated countless times for this sort of thing. And he was very instrumental in setting up the government of the United States. Prior to that, he had been Sir Francis Bacon, and also writing New Atlantis, with ideas for the New Atlantis, which is America now. And the third book, he wanted me to talk about his divine complement, Lady Master Portia, and this was Saint Germain and Portia's mystical role as directors for the Aquarian Age. And he is known as the Lord of Freedom, and Lady Master Portia is known as the Goddess of Justice. And I think just their very titles will show that when they become the leaders or the directors for the Aquarian Age, there will be wonderful freedom and wonderful justice. So that lets us know we will certainly have a better form of government, which will be divinely guided. They will never take over, but they will train and teach us. And this is something to really look forward to. And Saint Germain has always said that just before the Golden Age is to manifest, that there will be a movie about him. And he's wants this movie to prepare us for the Golden Age. And I'm not a movie writer, but I've talk to different people who are writing movies about Saint Germain, and I think this is necessary. And it will be part of what will propel us into the Golden Age. And he talks about this in these books. So it's been my great pleasure to work with him these many years. And I feel very, very blessed to have known Saint Germain and worked with him and Lady Master Portia all these years, and the other Ascended Masters. They are all just so wonderful. They're all preparing for the great Golden Age to come forth, and they're standing by with divine intervention. They say over and over, in just a snap of a fingers, they can be here when the timing is right. So we have no need to fear anything about negative predictions or fear anything. They're going to help us into this great Golden Age and direct us. And we're very blessed for all of this. And then I have a fourth book that I've been guided to try to get made into a movie. It's called The Gypsies at Secret Lake. And in this book, I relate that the gypsies are the most downtrodden, mistreated people on the planet, and yet their souls are of the highest. We owe almost all of our culture to the gypsies, especially in the entertainment world. It was the gypsies that started the first veterinarianism, because they were very close to animals and knew they were the first herbologists. They knew how to heal because they weren't around doctors. They could heal animals. They were the first animal trainers. They started the first circuses with their trained bears and such. They were excellent musicians. They started most all of our musical styles, from flamenco to just all different types of musical styles. They started our theaters and plays. They're an interesting people that I feel came from Atlantis, and they were in a little pocket of northern India for many centuries, and they were to themselves, their language is almost a pure Sanskrit. There are people who are looking to their language now for purity of the Sanskrit language. And because they were in this little pocket, they kept to themselves, they kept their own rituals, they have their own religion. One of the things that they were told is that they were never to be farmers. They were of a particular type of people who came in to be entertainers. They were to entertain the rest of the world and heal people. They have been terribly mistreated. People think of the Jews being tortured and burned and killed by Hitler, but also the Moors and the Gypsies. He killed 3 branches of people. There were 1.5 million Gypsies killed by Hitler. In other parts of the country, they were banned. They couldn't come to the public watering hole, and they were terribly mistreated. At one point, there was even a bounty. You got so much money for how many Gypsies you killed. But yet, their spirit always stayed high, and they kept doing their music. It was mostly the working class people that were against the Gypsies because they were taking away a lot of their jobs, because the Gypsies could fix and make anything. They're the most creative people on earth, and the basket weavers, they're the ones that knew how to mend metal, and so as they traveled around in their caravans, they would stop at the towns and fix everything for everybody, mend their pans and pots and pans, and they could do so much, heal their animals, their people. And so it was the common people that were against them. Actually, the kings and the royalties liked them, and they had them many times in court as their court entertainers because they were so superior to all other entertainers. So I think this book not only would make a wonderful movie, it's a very, very moving story about some gypsies, a band of gypsies, and a person who is part gypsy and joins them. He's a high businessman. The people that have read this book have said that you get goosebumps on every page because it's so touching. There's so many things that happen. And I think it would make an excellent movie, as well as give you a lot of very, very deeply spiritual ideas. It's very mystical. And you can find out more details about any of these books on my website, dorothyleon.com. as I explained the things in this Follies of Fundamentalism and how the follies is in being too literal, I decided to write what I refer to or think of as the most esoteric book I've ever written. I call it Revelation Revealed. And the reason I wrote this, it's about the 12 steps that lead us to our ascension, the 12 things that we have to go through. And I don't think Revelation is about cataclysms and bad governments and devils. I think that's a literal interpretation, but I think it's talking more about what's happening within us, in our kingdom within, and getting to the kingdom within. Like the earthquakes are the inner earthquakes that we go through, the traumas, and the beasts are lesser qualities. And so I go through the 12 steps of how we really progress and give you guidelines of what each step does and how you can determine exactly where you are on the spiritual path by which steps you're into and what lessons you are still learning at the time. And the people who have read it have said that it has helped them more than anything else that they've read to date. With this book being the most esoteric book that I've ever written, I've got a lot of feedback from people saying that it's really helped them a lot. But it's on a level that is maybe a little difficult for some people. And I try to cover all bases where everybody has a teaching that they feel comfortable with.
There's a lot about the earth that we don't know, and a lot about the earth that's anomalous and unexplainable. And there are a lot of people who think the earth is not at all, as we generally believe, solid, but actually hollow inside. Can you talk about that?
I've always felt that this would be a logical explanation. The aurora borealis, for instance, where does it come from? If there's not some sort of an inner light, or I don't want to really call it a sun, but some sort of an inner furnace in there that can come out. My philosophy has always been where there's so much smoke, there must be fire. I got very interested in this subject because it always felt right to me. And I started doing research on it, and I found that there has been so much talk about an inner earth in every single civilization for thousands and thousands of years back. And then I began meeting people who said that they saw some of the little inner earth beings and that some of them were blue. And as soon as I heard about the little blue inner earth beings, I thought, that must have to do with Krishna, because I'd always wondered why Krishna was always shown as blue. And so I started looking in especially to Krishna, and they said he came from within the earth. And this kind of led me to a lot of other research, and I just found this very fascinating. I spent a couple of years of just researching constantly, and in every civilization there's something about the inner earth. And I finally drew up all of the different research into book form and presented this book, Quest for the Inner Earth. And in this book, I'm theorizing. I don't come to definite pronouncements that this is the way it is, or that this is cut and dried or anything, but I'm giving people a lot of thought-provoking things to think about, a lot of possibilities, and a lot of things that seem very logical. I've collected some pictures, a lot of epic poems that have been written, and then I interviewed some people who had had actual experiences, either through meditation or otherwise, and I've just found it a very, very interesting subject. And then to top it all off, there are several channels who claim to channel beings from there. And at one point in my life, when I was going to some of the energy points and vortexes, I went up on Mount Shasta, spent time there, and I was in a deep meditation, and I was taken inside somehow to a city that was inside of Mount Shasta, and it just blew my mind. I was very fascinated with that, and I wasn't taken down deep into the Middle Earth or anything like that, but the references made during that little meditative experiences alluded to there being much, much more. This was just a little entry. And so with that in mind, it just has become a very real possibility. And in some of these channelings, I hear people say that there are different things that may be happening on the surface of the earth, and that our good space brothers, divine space brothers, are standing by in their UFO to, as it were, beam people up to save them if in case the planet is on fire or nuclear or whatever may happen. I don't like to get into the negative. And we've all known about that, the liftoffs or whatever. But also the channelings are saying that the little inner earth beings are coming out to check out the surface, and they are preparing to take a lot of us inside the earth. And this won't be the first time, because the Hopi Indians, for instance, tell very detailed stories of how when the earth was in problems on the surface, they were taken down through the Grand Canyon and into the inner earth, and they called the little beings that guided them there the ant people. And they said they looked like little praying mantis beings, kind of like what we might talk about, the little grays. And then they brought them back up when the surface was clear. So I know that the Divine Ones are looking out for us. They're not going to let us, the humanity, perish with the planet. And so no matter what happens on the planet, we will either be lifted up, taken inside, or something will happen to us. And I think the inner earth is going to play a great part at this time. And I was so enthused after doing so much research about the inner earth that I kept getting little inspirational thoughts of writing a fiction story. And I hadn't written many fiction. I usually keep everything to research. But I wrote this second book, Elysian Visits the Inner Earth. And I thought it would be interesting to people to actually take a lot of the research that I had gleaned and put it into story formed, where they could actually follow it and experience some of the things that the story actually talks about. And I placed the setting of this in Switzerland, and I have the main character as a little albino girl who, when the inhabitants there of Switzerland were moving from one area to another during a storm, or before a storm when it was very, very sultry and hot, that this little albino girl, albinos are not supposed to be in the hot sun, they cannot take heat, and this albino girl passed out. And in research with doctors, when an albino can pass out, you can't feel a heartbeat, you think they're dead. And they presumed this little girl was dead on this trip where they were going over a mountain, over to a better farmland. And because they were in a hurry, they had to beat the storm, they couldn't spend much time. They didn't have time for a Christian burial. They were on a highly rocky mountainous plain, and so they just placed the little girl that they thought was dead under a tree and covered her with leaves. And then some beings from the inner earth who make pilgrimages each spring to gather different herbs came by and saw this little girl, and they could more or less see by the tracks of the wagons and such, and knowing about the storm, that she was left there, so, and nobody would be coming back for her, so they took her home with them to the inner earth and raised her. And as she grew, she at one point became curious about where she might have been from, so she leaves and strives to find her family. So it's quite an interesting love story, and how she meets people here and on the surface, and then eventually takes her loved one back to the inner earth for a blessing. So it's all based on my research. It's got lots and lots of mystical things, as all my books, even my fictions, have a lot of mystical, spiritual things. And this book, I feel, would make an excellent movie, something like Steven Spielberg would be interested in, or Stephen Simon, or some of these that are doing the more metaphysical type movies. And I see this as a movie. I perceive this on a psychic level that it will be. And also a book that I wrote about my grandson, and indigo struggles to overcome drugs. All the things that he had to do, and the spiritual things that he went through that helped him. I feel that this will make an excellent movie. And then another fiction that I wrote, this was not a fiction, this was based on my grandson. This one was based on my sister, coming full circle. It's one of the most touching love stories and things that she went through. Would make a tremendous movie, and with all of her bands that she formed and musical things. And then I have a fourth book that I've been guided to try to get made into a movie. It's called The Gypsies at Secret Lake. And I thought I was through raising kids, but I had one grandson that was having a terrible struggle with drugs. Nobody could seem to touch him. He was too embarrassed to let the family know too much about. We did not realize, for instance, that he was homeless for 5 years. His dad didn't tell us because his dad was too embarrassed to admit that he could not manage to raise his only child. When he came to me, his dad brought him here because he had just had 9 teeth pulled due to using meth, rotting the teeth. His dad brought him here, and he stayed. And I really started learning what really had happened to him and his traumas through childhood, which hadn't been clarified to us. His dad was very secretive, didn't want us to know some of the things. He lived in a different town. So when I really got my grandson here, and I became his mother that he had never had. His mother had run off when he was 11 months old. I shared all of the things that I possibly could with him, but most of all I shared love. He had never felt loved or wanted, and it was so touching to watch his progress that I wrote a book about him called An Indigo Struggles to Overcome Drugs. And he is an indigo. Most of you are probably familiar with the indigo children. They're a group of children who are have an indigo aura. They're all very hyper. They're all extremely independent. They're hard to raise children, so I can't say that it was all my son's fault. He was very difficult to raise, and he's been with me for 2 years, and he is difficult, but he's also very loving. But these indigo children, because they are different, they are going to change the world. They are the John the Baptist type personalities that are coming to the earth just before the appearance of the Christ, in the same way that John the Baptist introduced Jesus. And they are coming as the wild men dressed in camel hair with the loud voices, just like John the Baptist did. They're not quiet little people. Like I said, my image of a church person or a divine person would be the little, all dressed in white. And the indigos certainly aren't that. They are warriors. They're going to change the world. And the group that is following them are the little crystal babies. Most of the indigos are from age 30 to about age 14 or so at this time. And the little crystal babies, I think the oldest ones probably are about 6 or perhaps 7 years old. Many of the indigos are having crystal babies. And the idea is the crystal babies are so pure, they're extremely the opposite of the indigos. They are quiet-natured, they are not warriors, they're totally pure. They're going to be the Golden Age leaders. But they can't come, they're too timid, or whatever, the pure, or whatever word you might want to use, to just come in and straighten up the world and start ruling it. They can't do that. These extremely active indigos will sweep in first, like John the Baptist, get the world cleaned up, and then after it's cleaned up, the little crystals will start being the leaders. And that's the divine plan. And so I feel very honored to have had this 2 years with my grandson living with me. We've become great buddies. I've worked with Saint Germain for over 30 years with the violet flame, and the violet flame is very close to the indigo energy. So I can understand that, even though I'm not as hyper and dynamic about it as he is. But it's giving me an idea of how the golden age is going to manifest. Because if there are a whole tribe of people like him, the world doesn't stand a chance. It's going to change. You don't argue with the indigo. And they're wonderful people, they're very loving people, but they have a pure vision of how utopia should be, and they're going to make it that way. And when they get it straightened out, then the little crystals will be able to be the rulers. So this book tells of his tremendous struggles to get off math. They say that only 8 in 100 can ever get off math, and he was able to. He's been off for a while. He's gone back to college. He's gotten his life straightened out. And it's just been a wonderful blessing to have him here.
Mm. Will you say something about tough love?
Tough love. As I had him here, I had so many relatives saying, well, you're babying him, you should be tough, you should do this and that. But I don't think love is tough. And I interviewed quite a few other indigos as I met through him, as he got into some groups. And I interviewed a lot of people who had been on drugs and had finally gotten off drugs. I asked them what they thought of the tough love. They said it didn't help them at all. They figured that people had tough love because they didn't want to bother with them. And I feel that love should be unconditional. And I don't think the unconditional love is very tough. There may be some guidelines where you might say tough love, like I would have a rule, for instance, when he first came, that you can't have drugs here and you can't bring any of your drug buddies here. That was my house rule. But as for loving him, I loved him unconditionally, and he had never been loved that way before. In fact, he hadn't felt the love. He felt that his father just did the things that made him look good to others rather than to truly love him. And so he's learned a lot through all of this, and he wants to be a counselor now and help others. And he said one of the things he would never do is be tough, that he would always love everybody unconditionally. But he would have rules. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be any rules. He's told me several times, Grandma, you're the first person that's really ever loved me. And it kind of brings tears to my eyes when he says that, but I do love him. And even when he's being kind of wild, I just see, well, he's very different, but I can love him anyway. I mean, that's what's making him powerful, and all the indigos. So I just have a great admiration for all the indigos now, and I can't wait for the violet flame. They are what the Native Americans are calling the fire beings, the beings of the seventh flame, or the seventh fire. And they've been predicted to come back, and the indigos are them. We're blessed.
Thanks for sharing that.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Leon, and about 3 years ago, my grandson came to live with me, and he's an indigo. At the time, I didn't know very much about indigos, but I certainly learned a lot since then. Without getting in specifics about my grandson, I'd like to say just a little bit about indigos. They started incarnating around 1982, probably. The oldest indigo, there's always forerunners. The oldest one might be as much as 35 years old. My grandson happens to be 25.
I'm sorry. I think I have to start you over.
No, okay. That's that's better for me anyway.
It looks better. So take 2.
My name is Dorothy Leon, and about 2.5 years ago, my grandson came to live with me, and he is an indigo. At the time, I didn't know too much about indigos, but I certainly...
Nope, we're going to do a take 3, because now I'm looking
Okay.
at this. This might just not be quite right, so let's do that.
Okay.
Thanks
Ready?
for being flexible.
Take
Okay,
3.
take 3.
I'm Dorothy Leon, and about 2.5 years ago, my grandson came to live with me, and he is an indigo. At the time, I didn't know much about indigos, but I've learned quite a bit since then. Some of it may be the hard way. But anyway, the indigos are quite a group of people. They're called indigos because of the color of their aura. And I have worked a lot with the violet flame, which is a combination of pink and blue. The indigo is far more blue, and blue happens to be the power ray, where pink is the love. These indigos are very, very powerful. They've started incarnating about around 1982. There's always forerunners, so probably the oldest one is around 35. My grandson happens to be 25. And then they quit incarnating probably at about 10 years ago, and then the crystal children started incarnating. And actually, many of the indigos have become parents of these crystal children. And how this relates, I like to relate it to John the Baptist. John the Baptist is like the indigo energy. He came in wearing wild-type clothes, eating wild-type food, and with a very dynamic personality, just really getting things going. And he was preparing the way for the Christ. And this is what the indigos are doing. They're preparing the way for the Christ, or the crystal children, crystal meaning Christ all. And the reason for this is the indigos have this very dynamic personality that can just make changes, and they see things. They're very interdimensional. They work a lot with the 4th and 5th dimension. They are going to make a lot of changes in the government and in the whole world, and they need to prepare the way for the more gentle Christ children, Christ crystal children that are incarnating now. And the crystal children can be more like the leaders when the golden age really gets going. But before they can take over as leaders, these indigos, who are also what the Indians call the people of the 7th fire, which would mean the 7th ray, the violet ray, and they can prepare everything so that the crystal children can rule in a very Christ-like fashion. They have a unique way of changing things. Living with one for going on 3 years now, I've seen just all kinds of things. They're very, very different. They have a power. Actually, technically, they have more of their DNA strands. They have more of their condens, nucleic acids is a term that's given to some of the energies they have in their head. They're very attuned to the grid. We've been through the eye-opening hippies, and then we were through the next generation of yippies. And these indigos are called the zippies because they are so fast. They're super powered. My grandson can do 2 separate things with his hands. He can do one thing completely different from this hand. He's an excellent worker. He gets raises real quick when he gets a job. He's like all the indigos, they have these superpowers, and they're going to help the planet a great deal. What I'd like to do is read a little portion. I've written a book about indigos, mostly about my grandson and his struggle to overcome drugs, and the struggle that so many of the indigos are having, because like my grandson says, it's like there's 20 channels going off in my head all the time, and the drugs quiet them down. Well, he's found a little bit better ways in the last 3 years to quiet himself down, but it's very difficult for them. And at one point I asked him about what changes he could see that he might make, or what the indigos might make, and he had some interesting comments. So I'd like to read this from the book. You know, Alexander, it is time to start thinking about the indigos and what lies ahead. I know you want to eliminate dishonesty and will not tolerate a lack of integrity. I know you plan to eradicate that which blocks mankind's progress, and that you want to do so as peaceful warriors. I know you will be able to wield your power so dynamically to change old systems and allow the growth of new consciousness. I know you can act as vanguard system busters who can shift from third dimensional thinking to fourth dimensional being, and that, like John the Baptist, you can propel others into an awareness of Christ consciousness. I also know you can work with the indigo light that is even more powerful than the violet ray of transmutation. Knowing all this, my question is, how and when will you begin to unite and set these powerful concepts into action? He remained silent for a moment, then murmured, I guess we still have 5 or 6 years to get our act together. Yes, I answered, but it should not be a last-minute thing. It will require a lot of planning, won't it? Grandma, he answered reflectively, I don't think it will be a third-dimensional thinking and planning thing, but a fourth-dimensional swinging into action. There's probably a little switch in our brain that will just suddenly be turned on when the timing is right. We will all be attuned to the grid and be guided. I have a few thoughts now, but who knows what inspiration may come later. I ask, can you share any of your thoughts that you have so far? Well, he shook his head, it's obvious that we need a truer form of democracy with honest leaders to get away from all the lies, secrets, and hype. And of course, we need to be free from boundaries, to unite as planetary global citizens instead of separate races and nations. We also need to quit fighting over our concept of God and finally blend spirituality and religion so the paranormal becomes the normal. That would certainly help to enlighten those who are endarkened. Then there's a lot of little things we need to change, like admitting that money isn't wealth, comfort isn't safety, communal living is better than everyone having a big mortgage on an individual house, and that we don't need so many possessions or being attached to them. It would also be nice to have a lot more technology and start making use of electronic medicine as well as color and sound therapy. And this was just but one little jewel that he shared with me. There were many, many more, and I'm sure the other indigos all are getting all kinds of things. I know when they've gotten together here at the house, they talk about their vision of utopia for the new age. And so I think a lot of our help in setting up the new age and preparing for a better way of life and doing something about changing the existing forms is going to come from these indigos. They have been sent here as a special group of people with a special power, and I think we can just plan to see a lot of changes and have a lot of faith in these new type of people with their new type of zippy energies. So if you're interested in more information or more details, this is my book, An Indigo Struggles to Overcome Drugs. And in his overcoming of drugs, we did use a lot of alternative type methods, one of which was acupuncture, which helped a great deal, and a lot of other things. There was something, a quantum physics SCIO, that's SCIO machine, helped a great deal. And there's a lot of help for these beings who will be the John the Baptist to prepare for the coming of the Christ, and the crystal children who will be our new governors. So thank you for listening. If you want more information, you can see my website, dorothyleon.com.
There's a lot about the earth that we don't know, and a lot about the earth that's anomalous and unexplainable. And there are a lot of people who think the earth is not at all, as we generally believe, solid, but actually hollow inside. Can you talk about that?
I've always felt that this would be a logical explanation. The aurora borealis, for instance, where does it come from? If there's not some sort of an inner light, or I don't want to really call it a sun, but some sort of an inner furnace in there that can come out. My philosophy has always been, where there's so much smoke, there must be fire. I got very interested in this subject because it always felt right to me. And I started doing research on it, and I found that there has been so much talk about an inner earth in every single civilization for thousands and thousands of years back. And then I began meeting people who said that they saw some of the little inner earth beings, and that some of them were blue. And as soon as I heard about the little blue inner earth beings, I said, that must have to do with Krishna, because I'd always wondered why Krishna was always shown as blue. And so I started looking in especially to Krishna, and they said he came from within the earth. And this kind of led me to a lot of other research, and I just found this very fascinating. I spent a couple of years of just researching constantly, and in every civilization there's something about the inner earth. And I finally drew up all of the different research into book form and presented this book, Quest for the Inner Earth. And in this book, I'm theorizing. I don't come to definite pronouncement that this is the way it is, or that this is cut and dried or anything, but I'm giving people a lot of thought-provoking things to think about, a lot of possibilities, and a lot of things that seem very logical. I've collected some pictures, a lot of epic poems that have been written, and then I interviewed some people who had actual experiences, either through meditation or otherwise, and I've just found it a very, very interesting subject. And then to top it all off, there are several channels who claim to channel beings from there. And at one point in my life, when I was going to some of the energy points and vortexes, I went up on Mount Shasta, spent time there, and I was in a deep meditation, and I was taken inside somehow to a city that was inside of Mount Shasta, and it just blew my mind. I was very fascinated with that, and I wasn't taken down deep into the Middle Earth or anything like that, but the references made during that little meditative experiences alluded to there being much, much more. This was just a little entry. And so with that in mind, it just has become a very real possibility. And in some of these channelings, I hear people say that there are different things that may be happening on the surface of the earth, and that our good space brothers, divine space brothers, are standing by in their UFO to, as it were, beam people up to save them if in case the planet is on fire or nuclear or whatever may happen. I don't like to get into the negative. And we've all known about that, the liftoffs or whatever. But also the channelings are saying that the little inner earth beings are coming out to check out the surface, and they are preparing to take a lot of us inside the earth. And this won't be the first time, because the Hopi Indians, for instance, tell very detailed stories of how when the earth was in problems on the surface, they were taken down through the Grand Canyon and into the inner earth, and they called the little beings that guided them there the ant people. And they said they looked like little praying mantis beings, kind of like what we might talk about, the little grays. And then they brought them back up when the surface was clear. So I know that the Divine Ones are looking out for us. They're not going to let us, the humanity, perish with the planet. And so no matter what happens on the planet, we will either be lifted up, taken inside, or something will happen to us. And I think the inner earth is going to play a great part at this time. And I was so enthused after doing so much research about the inner earth that I kept getting little inspirational thoughts of writing a fiction story. And I hadn't written many fiction. I usually keep everything to research. But I wrote this second book, Elysian Visits the Inner Earth. And I thought it would be interesting to people to actually take a lot of the research that I had gleaned and put it into story form, to where they could actually follow it and experience some of the things that the story actually talks about. And I placed the setting of this in Switzerland, and I have the main character as a little albino girl who, when the inhabitants there of Switzerland were moving from one area to another during a storm, or before a storm, when it was very, very sultry and hot, that this little albino girl, albinos are not supposed to be in the hot sun, they cannot take heat, and this albino girl passed out. And in research with doctors, when an albino can pass out, you can't feel a heartbeat, you think they're dead. And they presumed this little girl was dead on this trip where they were going over a mountain, over to a better farmland. And because they were in a hurry, they had to beat the storm. They couldn't spend much time. They didn't have time for a Christian burial. They were on a highly rocky mountainous plain. And so they just placed the little girl that they thought was dead under a tree and covered her with leaves. And then some beings from the inner earth who make pilgrimages each spring to gather different herbs came by and saw this little girl, and they could more or less see by the tracks of the wagons and such, and knowing about the storm, that she was left there, so, and nobody would be coming back for her, so they took her home with them to the inner earth and raised her. And as she grew, she at one point became curious about where she might have been from, so she leaves and strives to find her family. So it's quite an interesting love story, and how she meets people here and on the surface, and then eventually takes her loved one back to the inner earth for a blessing. So it's all based on my research. It's got lots and lots of mystical things, as all my books, even my fictions, have a lot of mystical, spiritual things. And this book, I feel, would make an excellent movie, something like Steven Spielberg would be interested in, or Stephen Simon, or some of these that are doing the more metaphysical type movies. And I see this as a movie. I perceive this on a psychic level that it will be. And also a book that I wrote about my grandson, and Indigo struggles to overcome drugs, all the things that he had to do, and the spiritual things that he went through that helped him. I feel that this will make an excellent movie. And then another fiction that I wrote, this was not a fiction, this was based on my grandson. This one was based on my sister, coming full circle. It's one of the most touching love stories and things that she went through. Would make a tremendous movie, and with all of her bands that she formed and musical things. And then I have a fourth book that I've been guided to try to get made into a movie. It's called The Gypsies at Secret Lake.
The Old Testament has a lot of names for God and a lot of different gods. And one of them is Jehovah. And you've done a lot of study. And what is your opinion and judgment about this being called Jehovah? Who is he?
Well, to me, Jehovah is an extraterrestrial being who came here. I believe that he was immortal. Many of the beings, extraterrestrials, have learned how to have immortality and not be mortal like we are. Hence, he could be here for many, many different centuries or millennium. I think he came here with a specific group of people in mind, and he had a specific plan in mind. So therefore he chose what are now known as the chosen people, the Jewish people. And he started, of course, with Abraham, as the Bible says, and he guided this particular group of people so that through their lineage there would have the platform upon which Jesus could be born, through their lineage. And I think this was his overall plan. However, I don't think he was one of the higher divine beings. There are certain places in the Bible where he even says that he was one of the lesser. He had a very violent nature, very impatient nature. He was not what we would call a loving God, nothing like what Jesus referred to as the Father. So the Bible is filled with all kinds of talk and descriptions of other gods. In fact, one of the commandments says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Right there it will tell you there were several. And the other beings had other divine, or not divine, but immortal beings guiding them too. And some of the gods even got into fights and wars and all this sort of thing. I think they were all overshadowed by the UFOs, what we might call UFOs. They might have called Merkaba vehicles or whatever they might have called them at that time. But there was a lot of interplanetary and intergalactic, perhaps, visitation. Some of the astronauts were called angels. And some of the UFOs were called flying chariots or fiery chariots or whatever. And with this in mind, as I've read the Bible several times, a lot of it didn't make sense to me until I started putting certain definitions on certain words. When I came to the word angel, I interpreted it as astronauts. When I came to cloud or chariot, I interpreted it as a UFO. When it came to Jehovah, I put one of the lesser gods. Then when I read it, it made perfect sense. I ended up writing a book about this called Is Jehovah an E.T.? And in it, I gave a lot of actual biblical quotes about what went on between Jehovah and the people and some of the other gods and their followers. And I bring it up to the point of Jesus, when Jesus was born. And when Jesus came to the people who were the chosen people, he was disappointed that they had not followed what he thought was the higher way. He tried to teach them and they weren't open. So he went to the Gentiles. He told the Jewish people that they had not seen the real God, the Father, that they had seen Jehovah, but not the higher God. And he taught the people the higher ways. And for this, of course, he was crucified, this among other things. I find it interesting that there recently has been dug up, if you want to say, this book of Judas, a book of Judas. And one of the things he says there is Jesus comes in a little late at the Last Supper. All the apostles, disciples are around the table, and they're praying to Jehovah. And they're a little concerned because he's late, and he comes in, and the book of Judas quotes him as saying, "Oh, so long I've been with you, and still you don't understand. It's not Jehovah. Jehovah is not the Father. He's the lesser. I've tried to turn you to the Father within, the true God." And he just spells it out so beautifully in that particular sacred writing. And this has been my contention all along, that there is a wonderful Father within, the God, the I Am Presence, whatever you want to call it, but I don't think his name was ever Jehovah. Now there may have been, according to the Kabbalah, a Yahweh, a JHVH or YHWH. There was allusion to a higher God, but it got mistranslated into the name Jehovah, which was not the same. So there's a lot of discrepancy in the Bible, a lot of mistranslations. But I feel if we are going to follow the teachings of Jesus, we need to listen to what Jesus said. And he talked about the Father within. So that's who I turn to, is the Father within. And I can see what Jehovah was doing. He gave the people a lot of good things, the hygienic cleanliness, the laws that would make them more ruly, and that sort of thing. He wasn't a bad person, but he was an impatient, kind of prone to violence person. But this might have been part of the lessons that we needed to learn.
And he was a real physical person who needed to be fed.
Yes, very much so. And this, to me, was why all these sacrifices were there. And especially when he led the people, the Hebrews, out of Egypt, and they were in the desert for the 40 years, he insisted that they take all the animals, and there was daily sacrifices. And not just like little sacrifices, but like 100 at a time. And then the meat on the altar would be beamed up, as it were. It would have flowery talk like, and the Lord swept down over the altar and picked up the sacrifices. But we would call this beam me up Scotty nowadays. And so this is what the Hebrews were doing, is feeding Jehovah and his host of astronauts. And this light or UFO type brilliant guide that they had, it talks about how this configuration of light would come down over the tent and then stay there for quite a while, and these beings would come into this tent that nobody else was allowed into. And so you could kind of see, like, someday if we start going to other planets, our astronauts, we may get awfully tired of eating the little pills that we have to take when we're in outer space, and it might be kind of nice to drop down to a native type planet and have them feed us for a while, or something like, or maybe even be our servant to do certain things. So I never think that Jehovah's a bad guy, that he just is not the Father that Jesus spoke of, as far as I'm concerned. So I outline all this in the book and talk a lot about what Jesus really taught and how he nullified Jehovah. And for more information, you can check my website, dorothyleon.com. My sister Peggy's had a most unusual life. She's responded to so many of the things that have happened to her in a very mystical, heartfelt way. One example, she's very attuned to nature, and when she would go to these churches, she didn't feel God there as much as she did out in nature. And so consequently, she would spend a lot of time in the woods and in lakes and this sort of thing. And as her children grew up, they all became rather orthodox and went to their church and all, and they were a bit upset because she wasn't going to a church. So she thought about this. So one Mother's Day, she invited them. She lived over the coast, about 40 miles away from them, and so she invited them over for Mother's Day to go to her church. And of course, they all said, "Mother, you have a church, finally." And she said, "Oh, yes." And so they all came over. She fixed them a big breakfast. And they all caravanned in their car, and she went to this wonderful park. And they all parked their car, and they said, "There's a church way out here." And she said, "Oh, yes, just follow me." So she took them on this little hike, and they got deeper into the woods, and there was a specific place where there was a wonderful little bridge that they all got onto this bridge, and there was a huge waterfall cascading down and plants and ferns everywhere. And she said, "I'd like everybody to kneel down on the bridge and face my church." And she said, "You will never hear a sweeter choir than that which you hear from the water. You will never smell sweeter smells in a church with incense." And she said, "You will never feel closer to God than when you're right here in His creation." And that was kind of the type of person my sister is. And so many things had happened to her through her life, which she handled so beautifully, that I finally wrote a book about her, which is Coming Full Circle. And my sister was and is an excellent musician. She writes her own music. She founded a motorcycle group so that she could be in nature more. She had a lot of trouble with her son, who ended up in prison. And she actually helped work with the prison system to determined that there's a difference between emotional disability and mental disability. They had considered him mental. He was very bright, very mentally alert, but couldn't handle things emotionally. And so she took it upon herself to introduce the system to the difference, and she got him on emotional disability. And since then, other people have recognized this, and that it is a very big difference. And her daughter was severely burned, and she had a lot of trauma to go through there. But most of all, she was just so in love with her husband. And after about 17 years, he ran off with a younger woman, and she was just totally heartbroken, never really got over him. However, she married another man who she said was a wonderful companion, not so much the deep love, but they had a wonderful marriage for 40 years, and then he died, and she was very heartbroken again, and her first husband came back into her life, so that's why it's coming full circle. And the karma that he had incurred, he was able to rectify in such beautiful ways. And it's just an extremely touching story of the way she's handled her life and been extremely mystical all through it. For instance, when she plays music, and she plays a lot in churches and other gatherings, and she says that when she starts singing, that something comes over her and it's no longer her, that she is like listening to something singing through her. And the people listening all say it's an angel, and I think so. Very proud of my sister. Hi, I'm Dorothy Leon.
And I'm Roger Nelson. I'm really pleased to be meeting Dorothy here today and to learn and hear about all the things that she's written concerning the Wheel of 19 Spokes and her other insights. It's just a pleasure. Come all the way down from Canada to be here, and I'm excited just to have this opportunity. I've been around the wheel. I visited of the points around the wheel. I visited 11. I've got 8 more to go. The ones that are left are on the east side, and I'm planning to do that within a matter of weeks. I'll have visited all the points. I've been to the center of the wheel. I visited the Grand Teton Mountains, stood in the shadow of the Grand Teton, felt the energy, saw the amazing things that are there. It's just a wonderful thing. My wife traveled with me. We attended the ceremonies at one of the sites with a blessing of the waters in Lake Tahoe. That was exciting. Over the years I've worked with this information. I helped Blue Thunder in 2004 locate places in Canada. I helped organize ceremonies in Canada in 2004, but I heard about the wheel quite a while ago, actually, around 1999, 2000. I was first made aware of it, and it helped my interest in exploring sacred sites and in exploring earth energies and natural pathways or in the land and landscape and the geometric relationship between landscape features and its connection with ourselves. And it's been part of what I have been doing for the last time since then. I made a point when I saw the map to visit all the places that I could get to easily, and it's just been a series of discoveries.
Well, that's really wonderful that you visited all those points, and in addition to the Grand Teton and the Wheel with 19 Spokes, that's just one energy center on Mother Earth, and of course there's centers within centers and geometric configurations all over. The whole planet is actually sacred, but there are definite holy spots. And I like to think of Mother Earth as an entity. She has chakras, like we have chakras.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Grand Teton is a major chakra, Mount Shasta is a major chakra. And she has meridians, like we have. If we get acupuncture, say, in our elbow, it might be affecting our ear or vice versa or something. And I think Mother Earth is that way. When we visit one of her holy spots, St. Germain has always told me that what's happening on one side of the globe is happening on the exact opposite at the same time. And so visiting sacred spots all over the planet is very helpful. But I'm very glad to hear that you've done this particular area. It's a very holy area.
Which interesting you say that, because I've been feeling for and really receiving a direction for a while that we need to be careful with what we do with Mother Earth, that we need to be conscious about what we take out and what we do and what we put in. And I've seen some, and I saw some of them on our travels, on the travels around the wheel. Some places that, to me, I felt that they were really hurting. And I felt that pain when I saw those. And I think there was a case of, there's a one area where they're strip mining away an entire mountain. And I won't pick on any one geographical area because I can't put my finger on it once, but it's somewhere around the wheel. And well, I can think of a few others too, in Saskatchewan and that, in Manitoba, closer to where I live, where that's happening, and you could almost feel the pain. One area that, it was so troubling when we were there, my wife and I think we nearly cried with the desolation, but it's the Owens Valley in the shadow of Mount Whitney, where it seems like you go there and you just feel that it just is dried up, and all what was once orchards and everything are all sucked dry, and there's no life left in it, and the land cries there.
Yes.
And
I think one of the probably most painful places for Mother Earth is close to the Navajo reservation, where they're doing their uranium.
mm-hmm.
What would you call uranium mining?
Yeah.
In that area, and that is such a holy spot. But you see, the dark forces know all of the secrets too. They know all of the cosmic secrets, and they know how to desecrate Mother Earth. They go to her most powerful spots and take away certain things. And Mother Earth is quite sensitive. Even some of the gold and the crystals and different things, they're not always meant for us to take out, or at least in such large qualities and quantities. And water, even taking the oil and pumping out the oil, and all these things are just like somebody would be doing that to our body, taking out all these things, dehydrating us and such. And I feel like the planet, when it was created, was beautiful and green everywhere, and deserts. I think the word desert comes from a word meaning desecration. And whenever we see a desert, something has gone wrong. And the Bible does mention that the desert will again bloom as a rose. And it's wonderful when you see areas where the desert is now blooming like a rose. One of those areas would be Jerusalem, where they've planted so many trees and done so many beautiful things. And so fortunately we have healers that are offsetting by a great degree the dark ones. And Mother Earth is not going to put up with much more. It's about to come to an end of her allowing us to abuse her.
That is one of the reasons why that I think I was inspired to organize this trip around the Circle of the 19. I spoke to Blue Thunder about it, and he felt, from his point, that would be a way to continue to maintain the activation, that work that was done in 2004. So much so that, and I've spoken with Dan Shaw about this, but the thing we're discussing is organizing a tour where a group of people could travel around and visit these places. I know many of the indigenous, I've met some of the indigenous people there, and the ones that I've talked to about it are excited about the idea. And there's others to meet and talk to. The vision I have is we would have people coming from all over the world that would come for this, and it would be a unique experience. Now, I'm going to ask you this because it still just seems amazing in my mind. Just where did the now I've read what was written about the wheel of 19 spokes, and where did the idea of these places come from, and then how did the conceptualization of, or how did you pick the actual locations, and how did that all start again?
Well, first of all, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
I'm just a servant for spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And my former husband had a little light plane, and we used to drive around, or fly around, I guess I should say. And since birth, I've been able to see energy. Like
Mm-hmm.
right now, I can see your energy. And our photographer over here, I like to call Angel, Dan Shaw, he's got lots of energy, beautiful aura. But I've always been able to see energy. But when I got up in the little light plane, and of course, when you get up in a plane, it's like going to the top of a mountain because you're actually above the Earth's effluvia. And I found my channeling and attunement was just so much greater up in the airplane. And so at first I just innocently asked my husband, who wasn't too much into this sort of thing, I said, "What is that light that's coming out of the top of the mountains?" And he said, "Oh, not you again, with your things." And he called it my spook show. But anyway, but to me, I took it very seriously, and then I would see this light coming out of mountains and then going over and like joining another mountain, and then I would see different things. So when I would get home, I would put it on the air charts, and I started seeing that there was configurations between these different ones. And at the time, I had 4 children at home, and so I couldn't do a lot of traveling or anything. But I did the air charts at every place that we flew over, and so that limited us to Oregon, Washington, and California, and a little bit of Nevada. But then the master started talking to me and saying, since I was so interested in this, they would show me other things on the inner. And during my meditations, they started showing me the Grand Teton and the great light coming out of there, which just paled the light I was seeing coming out of these other little mountains. It was just like a big fountain. In fact, they laughed and said, "These are mountain fountains." And then they showed me the 19 spokes, and they showed me just like the diagram that I made with the 19 equilateral lines. They showed it like a template coming down over a map, and I merely just wrote down what I saw. So Spirit did it, really, not me. And I always wanted a chance to go there and fly over there, but so far I've never had that opportunity. But I've been to the Grand Tetons, and I have not visited all the spots, so my hat's off to you for visiting all the spots. But I was shown to them, and like the opposite of you, you've seen most of the northernmost ones. I've seen most of the southern ones. I've spent more time around Arizona and this area lower than farther south than you have. So to put our knowledge together, I guess between the two of us, we've
Visited
the
everyone.
whole area, including Dan Shaw too has been to many of them. And Blue Thunder's doing a great job. He's a great energy. Talk about lights. Oh my gosh, I need sunglasses to look at that guy. What a bright light. Hi, I'm Dorothy Leon.
And I'm Roger Nelson. Yeah, that's interesting. So I find so it was, but the question always in my mind was, it was always mountains that you saw that were the lights were coming out of.
At the beginning, yes, and then I started seeing that there was energies within the waters too.
Oh.
And it's kind of like that's what the Bermuda Triangle's all about. It's not, there's no mountain there that we can see, but there is under, the water.
There is a
either
mountain under the water.
Or,
Yeah.
or I don't know if it'd be a mountain or there's something under the water. Some people say there's a great crystal under there, but whatever it is, there's a great energy just coming up through the water.
Like Lake Tahoe has
Oh, yes,
a great crystal deep in the waters.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And Lake Titicaca, too.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
I did have an opportunity to go there, and the boat traveled right over, and a bunch of us were attuning there, and we felt something coming right up from the water, and we were trying to touch the water at the outsides. The boat was kind of high, but it's like just even putting your hands down, you could feel little electric shocks. It was marvelous.
And
So Mother Earth is very, very alive.
in the one personal experience I had in 2004 was actually not too much of personal experience, but a story that was told me. We did our ceremony by a river, by the Red Deer River near Sullivan Lake, and we did our ceremony there. And there happened to be friends that had knew someone that was canoeing on the river that day, and at the very time of the peak of the ceremony, these people that were in the water, they felt the wave of energy flowing through the water like a wave. It just washed through them as it moved out from the center.
That's
And-
almost exactly the description people give of the Ganges, and
Yeah.
that's the sacred river in India. I've talked to people there. I haven't had an opportunity to go to India either, but they said that just what you explained, the wave just kind of filters through them, and it's a very holy water.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was. But the reason why I asked that is as I look at some of the spokes and points, and I visited those places, and sometimes it's easy when it's a tall mountain and it's taller than all the other mountains and that sort of thing. But when you get out on the plains, and I suppose that's why some people might scoff at the circle or whatever and say, well, I know it's easy to pick tall mountains and famous lakes like Lake Tahoe and everything. It's easy to see that those are, but what about the plains in North Dakota and South Dakota? And I think everybody feels they're pretty flat places, that there's really nothing to stick out to or stands out. There's some very large rivers there, but I have found through looking in the places that I've looked, because some of the places I've looked are fairly flat and there's no big land features, that even there you find very special and sacred places and energies. And I'll give you an example. There's one spoke that goes through on the wheel. I think it's the second from the top, second on the east from the top, and it's in western Saskatchewan. And the place where the spoke runs through, there's an ancient site there, right almost on the line, that has been revered and respected by the Aboriginal people. And on there and on that spoke, there's a site where there's a stone, a large rock, and it's got cup marks in it that have been carved over the years and everything. And if you come up to that stone, it is a teaching stone. It will speak to you, and it will give you lessons, and it will tell you about what was, what is, and what shall be. Speaks with a very deep voice. A grandmother rock is really what
Yes.
it's called.